4 Al Jazeera staff, including reporter Anas al-Sharif, were killed in an Israeli attack on a tent for journalists outside the main gate of Gaza's Al-Shifa hospital. This is Al Jazeera's version of events, but I'm sure if you go on social media you'll see this has been all the rage of this story today. Everyone's talking about it, including me, because I've got some insight on this one. I was fortunate enough to be in Baghdad back in 2003. And, well, I say fortunate enough because the alternative was staying in Middlesbrough for 6 months. So I class myself as being very privileged to have been to Baghdad during a war, on account of the fact there was less dead babies on the streets than you would see in the car park of Aldi on Linthorpe Road in the borough. Sarah reported it thusly: Israel just assassinated the entire Al Jazeera crew. Fearless journalists and cameramen reporting the truth amid genocide. This is a war crime and a crime against humanity. Where are the Western journalists? Will they condemn this or choose silence and complicity? And she shared a picture of the fella here, which is it's a little bit different from the picture I've got of him. The picture I've got of him is showing him here fangirling like a teenager at a One Direction concert in front of these 3 fellas. And the most important one, who he's taking a joyous selfie with, is this fella, Yahya Sinwar, who, if you haven't guessed by now, was not a particularly nice chap. So stay tuned, I'll talk you through it. I'll tell you what happened when I was in Baghdad, regale you with an amusing story about George Bush, who was apparently this close to opening a can of whoop-ass, as the old American president would have said, on the entire company of Al Jazeera for supporting, promoting and directing funds and resources to, well, basically the same group of fellas who gave Ken Bigley a particularly close haircut. And when I say close, those young people amongst you might not know who Ken Bigley is, but let's just say this haircut involved them taking 15 to 20 inches off the entire top half of his body. Actually, joking aside, this does remind me of a true story. I was working as the Conco at the time, the continuation NCO in Baghdad. One of my tasks was to give weekly intelligence briefings to the colonel that ran the BSU, that's the Baghdad Support Unit in Baghdad. And we were there when Ken Bigley, if you don't know, he was a contractor who'd been kidnapped by terrorists. And about a month before he got killed, I used to always drop a funny into my intelligence briefings, just for a crack, you know. And at the start of this one, I gave the colonel and a load of his aides. I said, "Oh, have you heard the news? We've actually got some intelligence off the ground that we found Ken Bigley." And the colonel went, "Crikey, Corporal T, that's amazing. Where did you get this from?" And I said, "Yeah, he's in Baghdad, but his head's in Fallujah." No, nobody laughed. Right, so let's get Al Jazeera's version of events. They said Anas al-Sharif was among 5 Al Jazeera staff killed by Israel in Gaza. Al Jazeera staff were killed in a targeted attack near Al-Shifa hospital in Gaza City. 7 people were killed overall in the attack, and they included Al Jazeera correspondent Mo Kwarikwe, camera operator Ibrahim, another Mo, obviously can't move for Mo's, Mo, and Mo. Mo Nufal and Mo Aliwa. Shortly before being killed, al-Sharif, a well-known 28-year-old Al Jazeera correspondent who had reported extensively from northern Gaza, wrote on X that Israel had launched intense concentrated bombardment on the eastern and southern parts of the city. Now, there's a few important bits of information they're missing here. First of all, he wasn't a full-time employee, he was a stringer. That's what they call it in the industry, where you just pay them whenever you need them, basically. And secondly, this stringer, obviously, because he's not a full-time Al Jazeera correspondent, he's not spending, time in London and Paris and Rome. He's just boots on the ground for them in Gaza. And secondly, he appears to have numerous links to terrorist organisations, and obviously the photograph of him acting like a teenage girl in front of Harry Styles is evidence of that fact, because the bloke that he's pictured with, Yahya Sinwar, was believed to be the 2IC of Hamas in the Gaza Strip, which is why they killed him during an intense firefight. He'd been to jail about 8 times. He was specifically designated a terrorist by the United States government. And in May 2024, Karim Khan, the prosecutor of the ICC, announced his intention to get an arrest warrant for Sinwar for war crimes and crimes against humanity. And reading about this reminded me of when I was in Iraq, when we invaded Iraq. One of the first places that the Americans bombed was the Al Jazeera bureau in Baghdad, because they knew, military intelligence knew for a fact, that Al Jazeera was assisting the terrorists who were attacking British and American soldiers in the capital. It was an open secret that every single person on the ground in Iraq knew for a fact. Be hostile to Al Jazeera, never talk to them, never let them in anywhere, deny them entry, just totally blanket ban them from every military base. And yes, at one point, use the Air Force to bomb the ever-loving shite out of them because they appear to be supporting the enemy. And there was even a leaked memo that you may remember, if you pay attention. Not too much about it in the news, so we'll have to rely on the Wikipedia version of events, so take them with a grain of salt. But obviously it proves there's some truth to what I'm telling you, because I remember this happening. And this is after they bombed the Baghdad bureau during the initial invasion. The Al Jazeera bombing memo is an unpublished and unverified memorandum made within the British government, which is said to be the minutes of a discussion between United States President George W. Bush and Prime Minister Tony Blair. The Daily Mirror published a story on its front page on 22nd of November 2005 that said the memo quotes Bush speculating about bombing Al Jazeera's World HQ in the Qatari capital of Doha and other locations. The story said that Blair persuaded Bush to take no action. Apparently the meeting took place during Operation Vigilant Resolve, which was the assault on Fallujah. Some harsh fighting there between the US Marines and the Iraqis. And the day before the meeting, US Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld described Al Jazeera's coverage as vicious, inaccurate, and inexcusable. And as usual, I'll just ask you to apply a little bit of the old common dog here. Do you think a bunch of fighting age men whose names all start with M, right? Do you think a bunch of fighting age men whose names all start with M from some very strange countries who generally make up the inhabitants of the boats that arrive in Dover constantly, do you think a bunch of blokes like that, who post selfies like that, do you think those blokes might possibly, I don't know, support people doing things like running into pop concerts with pockets full of rat poison and ball bearings and blowing themselves up in front of a load of women and kids? Or like blokes running into Taylor Swift dance classes and stabbing little girls in the eye? Do you think those type of people would support that type of thing? Because seems to me like it's quite likely. Yeah, and US intelligence directly led to the purposeful bombing of the Baghdad branch of Al-Qaeda. I nearly said Al-Qaeda, more or less the same thing, Al Jazeera, when we invaded Iraq. So I'm just telling you, you should be a little bit sceptical of the claims made by Al Jazeera. And one more thing, I'll just add this as a cherry on top. Oh, look, there he is with this, there he is with dressed all in black with an AK-47, weird. Not the point I'm getting at, though. The point I'm getting at is, as Cenk Uygur and the other thousands and thousands of well-known figures are talking about nothing but this incident, there's no evidence that the Western journalists are ignoring it. It's on every mainstream news outlet, and even Cenk Uygur's gobbing off about it, about how they executed these innocent journalists who've never harmed a fly. No, it's not happening. It's not happening. The Western journalists love talking about it, and our politicians and the chattering classes love talking about this, slagging off the 4B2s. Because it's in their interests to make a complex situation sound simple. It isn't. I haven't talked about it too much because I still think the common sense position to have is to be relatively neutral on the scenario and let two groups of people, i.e. the regulars at Allen's Snack Bar and the 4B2s, because ultimately that's what it is if you distill it down to it. It's a foreign conflict that has nothing to do with us. And Israel-Palestine, that's been the gift that keeps on giving for the last 70 years. And that's only the recent version of events. If you really want to go get down to it, that's been kicking off for 1,000 years, millennia. It's a millennia-old problem that'll never get fixed. And it has nothing to do with me. I'll concede that both groups have their own interest at heart. As I've said many times, the King David hotel bombing proves that. They've got their own self-interest at heart. So I'm not saying you should be a rabid flag waver for either side of this conflict, but I'm just telling you what I know. Some hard facts, which is Al Jazeera is jam-packed toppers with blokes who fully support outright mass murder and terrorism against anyone who doesn't align with their ridiculous, largely plagiarised beliefs, gifted unto the world by a pot-bellied, epileptic midget warlord who basically spawned his own religion that has been a massive pain up the arse, and my arse in particular, for millennia. So ask yourself a simple question. Do you think someone who's indoctrinated, conditioned by a belief system like that, like the regulars at Allen's snack bar, do you think it's reasonable to assume and agree with George Bush and Donald Rumsfeld and the US intelligence services that large numbers of those men basically think it's a good thing when something like October 7th happened and thousands of innocent women get the good news off the most violent, bloodthirsty savages you'll ever see? I'm just putting it out there. Seems a reasonable conclusion to arrive at to me. I don't believe that these innocent journalists were assassinated for no reason. I think it was an intelligence-led operation, and they knew for a fact that that bunch of blokes were assisting the enemy, and there's a war on. So they bombed them. Not a moral thing to bomb anyone, but there's a big difference between dropping a bomb on a bloke who's assisting the enemy and posing with an AK-47 and doing things like the lads on October 7th did, which is literally bayoneting babies. And we all know what happened to the girls who were unlucky enough to be at that music festival, Tommy. So I'm just putting it out there. Maybe you shouldn't jump to conclusions on this one and agree with the chattering classes in the UK who, let's be honest, are all supporting Hamas because they've always said we're good people, we're the good people because we support the good people in Gaza. And then when October 7th rolled around and you see them literally dragging sex slaves away from a music festival and dancing on the body of a dead hippie in the streets, they see them doing that and they feel shame and guilt because they go, whoa, hang on a sec. If I always said I was a good person because I support the good people in Hamas, and then they promptly shag a few thousand women to death, if I suddenly face the mirror and accept the fact that I always said I was good because I'm on the side of the good guys, and then they prove themselves to be full-blown medieval savages, then you're not good, are you? You're evil. Because they're evil, and what they did at the music festival was the definition of evil. So basically the chattering classes are all supporting Hamas and endlessly slagging off the 4B2s because they don't want to face the mirror and go, oops-a-daisy, maybe they aren't the innocent victims we constantly called them. So that's why they've spent the last 2 years memory holding the event that kicked off the latest round of hostilities and once again gaslighting the world, trying to tell them that up is down and left is right, and the blokes who paraglide into a music festival and shag people to death, they're definitely the good guys. Ludicrous situation. It's a war, it's complicated, it's a millennia-old situation that the angry bootneck's not going to fix, is it? All I'm saying is, maybe have a healthy dose of skepticism for the people telling you who the goodies and the baddies are, as if this is as if this is Star Wars. Although, no, that's a bad analogy, because obviously I supported Darth Vader against those pussy rebels. But you know what I'm saying. Like, it's He-Man versus Skeletor. It isn't. It's a complex situation. And I don't for a second believe all those Al Jazeera fellas, yes, they were all fellas, were on the side of the great and the good. But that's just my opinion. If you disagree, please feel free to let me know in the comments, as usual. And also give it a like and a share if you can be arsed. Have at it down there, and I'll see you all tomorrow. Toodle pip. Cheers.